There's a cow field behind my house. I moved to the house with the cow field behind it when I was 6 and was immediately filled with a sense of wonder. My old house was on a sleepy suburban street. Nothing but houses and businesses around. Certainly nothing to explore. Now I had what seemed like hundreds of acres to run around in. My parents told me not to go out there, putting an immediate damper on my excitement. We didn't know the people who owned the land, and that they might not want kids running around the property. I obeyed, and a few years went by. Around 3 years after my family moved in, our neighbours to the right moved out, and new ones occupied the house shortly thereafter. We went over to introduce ourselves, and were greeted by a set of fraternal twin girls and their parents. They were around my age, and we became fast friends. Unlike me, the twins were anything but obedient. They had a bad case of early onset teenage rebellion, even though we were all around 10. Just like me, their parents had told them that the cow field was off limits. Unlike me, they didn't plan on obeying their parents. Days after they moved in, they expressed interest in exploring the cow field. I told them I wasn't sure, that it probably wasn't a good idea. My parents were right about the cow field, but for the wrong reasons. With parental advice disregarded, we set out to explore the mysterious pasture. The cow field was not some verdant pastoral stock image. It was hilly, with 2 creeks intersecting along one of the electric fences set up around the perimeter. One of the creeks bisected the most open area of the property. Gnarled logs lay every few hundred feet, and bushes dotted the landscape. This is where the cows spent most of their time. They grazed lazily and paid us no mind at all. A road ran along one of the fences and eventually led to a neighbourhood that could be seen from this particular area. There was a wooded section, which is the portion that bordered both the twins and my backyard. Beyond the woods was an open area that bordered the property owner's house. In this open area, equipment for cattle care was guarded by a minefield of cow patties. A circular hay container, rusty farm equipment, a dilapidated chicken coop, and a floating ball water trough all sat within 100 yards or so of the house. The most notable part of the cow field was the barn. The structure was near the other farm equipment, but was obstructed by a grove of trees, twisted and bent in what seemed to be an effort to hide it from view. Nevertheless, the rotting structure peeked over the top of its hiding place. Near the barn was the entrance we used, a chained pipe gate nestled in the corner of the cul-de-sac, next to the twins' house. The 3 of us left our houses under some pretense or another, likely to go play with a neighbour up the street, or to hike up one of the trails that snaked up the mountains that enclosed our neighbourhood. We packed unnecessary supplies for our expedition, as children tend to do when going on an adventure. Backpacks full of snacks, flashlights and plastic bags for samples of this strange and forbidden land. With our gear in order and our will unbent, we made our way to the pipe gate. We stood looking at the gate for a few minutes as we worked up the courage to climb over. I couldn't go first. Anxiety had been welling up inside me during the walk over. Excruciating bile gnawed at my insides, a byproduct of violation of my parents' trust and the need to gain the respect of my new friends. The twins characteristically went first, and I nervously followed them into the beyond. Once we'd all climbed over the gate, an intense shift in the air took us by surprise. Our childlike wonder melted away into a sobering fear. The shadows cast by the trees seemed to thicken. We looked at each other. The twins' stubborn curiosity faded away. I suddenly didn't feel lonely in my fear anymore. Despite this shift, we moved on. That day, we explored the open pasture with the creek, and to our delight, we found blackberries. Bushes full of berries speckled the open parts of the pasture. The summer had given us this gift, and with it, our fear began to fade. After eating ourselves sick and getting the lay of the land, we headed back towards our houses, determined to venture back in the next day, and the day after that. Over the rest of the summer, we made consistent trips into the cow field. The sinister air no longer tainted our exploration. We remained undetected by the owners of the cow field, until one day when we were messing with the ball in the water trough. A woman dressed in overalls called to us from the house nearby. She seemed jovial, maternal even. She told us she didn't mind us playing in the field, and to pick and eat as many blackberries as we liked. We apologised for not asking for her permission to be on the property, and that we appreciated her letting us explore. She told us to be careful around the barbed wire and electric fences, and to watch out for cow patties. We thanked her again, and turned to go back home. But before we got far from the house, she called out again, and said something I won't forget, not until the day I die. Stay away from the barn. The woman's happy demeanour had become deadly serious. A tone shift similar to the one when we entered the cow field for the first time. We'd hardly noticed the barn up until this point. Of course, we had seen it, but something deep down had already warned us about it. Something this strange woman had just confirmed. We made our way back to our houses, trying to laugh off what the woman had said. After all, we knew the cow field well by this point. What could possibly be so dangerous about the barn? Rusty equipment? Maybe that's where they kept the bulls or something. But we heeded the warning, at least for the time being. Fall came and went, with a few visits into the cow field. The blackberries were all but gone. One of our last trips was particularly notable because of the sounds. Soon after, we had hopped over the gate and began our trek that led to where the cows idled in the cool air. We heard rattling. We all stopped in our tracks and listened closer. It was coming from the barn. It sounded like chains being shaken violently. Our imaginations ran wild. Was there a monster being kept in the barn? Maybe aliens? Whatever it was, it scared us enough to remember the woman's warning, stay away from the barn, and to get back to the safety of our houses as fast as we could. An especially cold winter kept us out of the pasture. Both the twins and I got Wii's for Christmas, and we were more than content to play Mario Kart together until it was warm enough to play outside again. As soon as the springtime rolled around, we were eager to get back out and see if the seasons had changed the landscape in any notable way. Our first trip back in this new year would be the last time I ever stepped foot in the cow field for the rest of my life. As soon as we arrived at the gate, we noticed the smell. It wasn't the regular, almost comforting smell of cow patties. It was far more putrid. It was as if the spring had unearthed this unholy stench from the bowels of the earth. We looked at each other in disgust, all of us fake retching and plugging our noses dramatically. As we walked further into the field, the smell became stronger and stronger. And that's when we realised the smell was coming from the barn. We remembered what the woman had said towards the end of last summer. Stay away from the barn. One of the twins started towards the dark, rotting structure so carefully concealed by trees. I stopped her and reminded her what we were all privately thinking. Stay away from the barn. She said that this was different. Didn't I want to solve this mystery? Didn't I want to know what was causing the ungodly smell? I didn't. She trudged on. Even her sister cried in protest. Stay away from the barn, she said. I muttered some words in agreement. She continued and disappeared into the grove. A minute of heavy silence crept by as the rustling of movement got farther away. We both stood and waited, soaking in the intensity and stench. A scream shattered the silence of the world where we were still children. We rushed in and found the other twin standing at the entrance to the door of the barn. We turned the corner and saw what made her scream in terror. A man sat hunched against the back corner of the barn. Gashes in the rotting side of the barn let sunlight in to illuminate his decaying corpse. His torso had been flayed to the bone, the ribs barely damming up his organs that had begun to spill through after the spring thaw. A dripping from the ceiling took our attention away from the dead man. We looked, in unison, up at a woman who was nailed to the crossbeam of the barn. Her headless body was completely naked, dripping fluid from open wounds from the place where her head used to be to her toes. I puked, then I ran. All three of us rushed to the safety of the twins' house. We ran inside and relayed the story to the twins' parents, through choked sobs and gasps of clean air. The police were called. My parents came next door and hugged me while I cried. After telling the story to the authorities, I don't remember much. I remember being given a sleep aid. I remember the police going to the nice woman's house. And I remember the police dogs barking all night. The days after were a confusing haze. The twins moved out only weeks later. I never said goodbye. Even seeing each other would be too much for all three of us. After that, we simply went our separate ways. I haven't seen them to this day, and it's probably for the best. The woman who owned the property had been using the barn as storage, not for hay or actual cattle, but the bodies of hikers that she had abducted from the surrounding trails. The two bodies we saw belonged to a couple who had been hiking the Appalachian Trail in the fall. The chains we heard all those months ago weren't attached to a monster as we had originally thought, but people. The monster lived in the house on the other side of the fence. The woman would often walk the AT in the surrounding area and strike up conversation, offering people a meal and a place to spend the night off trail. She would then drug their food and put them in the barn, gagged and chained, to be tortured and eventually killed. In total, the police found and identified 9 bodies, all missing persons last known to be on the Appalachian Trail. Some remains weren't able to be named, leading the police to believe that there could be as many as 13 victims, dating back as far as the early 2000s. I learned all of this long after, of course. What kind of parent would tell their child details about such a horrific series of events? I still live here with my parents. I still look out my window into the cow field sometimes. I try to remember the good memories I had out there with the twins. Pretending to be Harry Potter characters in the woods, collecting mica we found in the creeks, touching the electric fences on dares. I hold a lot of regrets for someone as young as I am. I've tried to justify or get over as many as I can. But there's one that will haunt me forever, until my dying breath. What could have been if we stayed away from the barn?